Hello everybody and welcome to Picklehaube Gaming, and today we'll be doing a console tier list. And the reason I'm doing this is because I saw Pro Jared's and I thought, hey, I can do this too. So let's go right ahead and let's start with the second generation of consoles. So the 2600, the 5200, the Intellivision, the Colecovision. So I would say the Atari 2600 is, has a pretty big frickin' library and lasted a really long period of time. However, it's cheap to collect for, it's cheap to, obtain games for, except for all the rare ones. But the quality of some of the titles can be a little naff, so with that in mind, I'd say the first console we would put Atari, the 2600, in B tier. Next would be the Intellivision, which released later. The Atari was released in 1977. The Intellivision was test marketed in 1979 and was released, I think, 1980. So, but it was announced as far back as 1978. So, there's some pretty good arcade games on the Intellivision, but because the way its controller is, and it's the first 16-bit home console, which I feel like is historically significant. So, see. Next is, I would say, the 50. That's not the 50. Is this the 5200? No, that's the 7800. So the 5200. I personally enjoy because I feel like once you get past the shitty controller, there's a lot of fun to be had with this system, and I like it a lot. But, because of just how thin the library is relative to its older brother, it's, kind of eh. But do I go for B or C? Do I go with how I feel or how it historically was? I'm going to go with historical. Then that leaves us with the ColecoVision. And the ColecoVision I'm just going to put in B tier because I feel like it's a good console. It got really good games, and it runs on a similar chipset to that of the SG-1000 and the MSX, which is friggin' amazing. And some fan of the ColecoVision made the Super Game module, which made it even more like an MSX computer. So, what do you know? So, up next is the third generation. So, the Master System, the NES, and so on and so forth. So, let's go with the NES first. And I am just going to put the NES in B tier. And yes, it's a good system. Yes, it has a lot of good platformers, a lot of good arcade action-y kind of games. But it is not a fun console to collect for, mostly because once you get past all the games that everybody else played on the NES, there's nothing really there to get. Like, what am I supposed to do? Collect all the LJN games? Like, that's not fun. That's torture. That's almost like the video game equivalent of CBT. Like, that's not really fun. So, The Master System, on the other hand, I am just going to put it in A tier because, for one, I feel like whatever the NES can do, the Master System can do either slightly worse or slightly better. Like, for instance, do you want a Metroid experience? Well, there's Zillion. Do you want an RPG experience like Final Fantasy? Well, there's Phantasy Star. Do you want something like Mario? Well, we got a whole bunch. Do you like Alex Kidd or Psycho Fox? Like, there's a lot of options for games to be had on the Master System. And yes, there are less games on the Master System than the NES. But it's a lot more fun to collect for because you actually have to do research into what games are good and what games you personally like. I think it's just it's more fun to collect for. I think that's the point I'm trying to get across. And the 7800, I'm just going to put in D tier because while it is better than the 5200 in every way except sound, originally they were going to plonk the Pokey chip in it, but they decided not to, just keep the old sound capabilities of the 2600. Go figure. So, whatever. Oh yeah, so there's like one first generation console over here, the Odyssey. The Odyssey I'm just going to put in F tier because even though it's the first and the most historically significant, all of its games are basically many different variations on two glowing dots floating around on a TV screen. All the actual game bits is reliant on whatever the two players want to do and whatever graphical overlays they put over the television screen. And I mean literal overlay, not like controller overlays, like plastic sheets you put over the television screen. So just for that reason and the fact that Atari managed to consoleize Pong a year or two later, it, kind of naff. So anyway, that brings us to our next console, the next console generation, the fourth generation, the fun one. So let's go with the Super Nintendo. And I'm just going to put it in A tier because it's like the NES, except a lot better. It's a bit more fun to collect for. However, all the really good games like Super Metroid, Earthbound, a lot of the really cool games that everybody says are the best on the system cost an arm and a leg. Like, seriously, if I have to sell my kidneys just for Chrono Trigger or Earthbound, then why bother? Why friggin' bother? It's just, it's got really good RPGs. That's going for it. But I'm going to have to put the Genesis in S tier because here's the thing about the Genesis. It is a little bit better than the Super Nintendo in my opinion. In my opinion, I feel like the Genesis is better because it has a lot more fun to it. It's got many great arcade games. It's got fighters. It's got shoot 'em ups, and is more capable of doing action-y type games better than the Super Nintendo, due in part to its faster, more capable CPU. The Genesis I also like a lot more because of its place in 90s pop culture, as it was part of that adolescent sort of like that hip sort of, kind of rude, just the general like MTV sort of, the MTV watching sort of attitude, nonconformist kind of culture that sort of was prevalent among the teenagers amongst the 1990s, which I like. Like, I like the cultural things that Genesis stands for. Like, I love how it's such a big cornerstone of the 90s. And another reason I like it is because it's upgradable. And yes, the 32X sucks. Yes, the Sega Cd is a expensive failure known for FMV games. But I mean, look at Five Nights at Freddy's. It's doing so well for itself, despite it having the gameplay that is honestly a little on the same level as Night Trap. If Scott Cawthon can make gangbusters, selling millions of copies, making billions of dollars from creating what is essentially just Night Trap at a Chuck E. Cheese's, then I feel like the Sega CD should be brought into a better light. That and the Sega CD has lots of good games like KO Flying Squadron, Snatcher, the Lunar series. Even Sonic frickin' CD is good. And yes, I know, the collision detection is bad in Sonic CD, but y'all simp for you guys simp for Super Mario Sunshine, and that game's got collision detection problems. So I don't see why I should, praise Sonic CD. That and the 32X is a kickin' port of Doom, I'll tell you what. As well as Virtua Racing. And we got the itty bitty the honorable mention, the TurboGrafx 16. I'm just going to put it in B tier because it's not bad, but it's a little funky in the sense that that it tries to do a lot of the stuff that the Super Nintendo and the Genesis does. It's heavy on the arcade action. It's got the main controller has built-in turbo functionalities, but I feel like the system had a lot of potential, and because of NEC's just sort of poor management, it just sort of got flogged around and just friggin' died. That my dad owned one, so, cool. So, handhelds. The Game Boy, I am going to put in S tier because it's got a bunch of cool games, a bunch of shovelware, but I feel like that's a given for any Nintendo system post. You know what? All Nintendo systems have shovelware. I'm going to retract that half a statement. So, but hey, it got Pokemon, it got Mario, and it made Tetris popular. So there you go. The Game Gear, I am just going to put in B tier because it's got color. That's all it got going for it. Got some great Master System ports, got some great games, but you really have to love the Master System in order to really fully enjoy it. Anyway, now we're going into the consoles that aren't quite 4th gen, but aren't quite 5th gen. And we're going to do the CDI, which I'm going to put in D tier. And the reason I'm putting in D tier and not F is because I really like the Zelda CDI cutscenes. I really like the Hotel Mario cutscenes. And I like those because of YouTube poop. And when you're the system known for essentially kickstarting the YouTube poop craze and providing material for the YouTube poop community, like all it needs is a music generator-esque game where you mix and match your own Michael Rosen poems, and you've got the ultimate YouTube poop machine. Next is the 3DO, which I'm going to put in C tier because a lot of its good games got ported to the PS1 with, some getting minor upgrades, some major upgrades. But I feel like it's got some value to it. I mean, not enough to warrant a at-launch $700 price tag, but hey, some people like performing weird things on their wallet, so I'm not going to kink shame them. And then the Jaguar. F. Tempest Tooth, the thing about Jaguars that on one hand, you have Tempest 2000. On the other hand, you got a bunch of Commodore Amiga ports. On the other hand, you got shitty 3D games. And on the other hand, you have Tempest 2000. And if everybody knows you for Tempest 2000 and nothing else, then I'm sorry, buddy, but you're out. Also, we have the Sega Pico, so I'm going to put it in D tier as opposed to F tier because it tries to, educate kids, and its literal existence is for Sega to prove to American senators that not all video games are bad. Of course, they went ahead and made the ESRB, so the Sega Pico's point of existence sort of, went away. Oh yeah, Game & Watch. C. Just C. Oh yeah, Virtual Boy. Hard F. If you know anything about the Virtual Boy, it's a hard F. Not a hard R, a hard F. I should clarify that. Oh yeah, and I forgot the Apple Pippin. F. It sucks. As of all the 4.5 generation CD consoles, the Apple Pippin is the worst. It lasted almost as long as the Virtual Boy before it getting axed by Steve Jobs. And yes, Apple made the Pippin. It's an Apple product. But, of course, Apple would try gaming later with, the iPhone, but you know how it is. So anyway, that leads us into the 5th generation. PlayStation, hard S, because the PlayStation has sort of the adolescent teenage, in-your-face 90s attitude that the Genesis had, and it also had the Super Nintendo's library. So the PlayStation was basically, if you took the Sega Genesis's library, the Super Nintendo's library, and put it together on a system that ran on CD-ROMs, then you've got the perfect system. It has the cool action games. It has the cool JRPGs. It's everything that I would ever want out of a console from the 90s. And the Saturn, D tier, because it has a lot of cool games for it, but not a lot of cool games. And all the cool games cost exorbitant. It costs a lot of fucking money. And sure, you can get the Japanese games for pennies on the dollar, but I mean, why the hell would I want to import a bunch of RPGs in a language that I can't read? I mean, sure, I can learn how to read Japanese, but if I have to learn another language in order to play a game just for the sake of saving a few dollars, you know what? In fact, I think all the money that I would spend on Japanese imports in the Saturn would actually be significantly more expensive because of all the lessons I'd have to pay for to learn Japanese. So, D tier. Don't worry, that's not Corona. Anyway, the N64. B tier. And Pro Jared said this, and he made a great point about this in his console tier list. The Super Nintendo, once you take away all the games that aren't Nintendo related, including the Rare games, because at that point Rare was a second-party developer for Nintendo. That's a whole different story. There is barely anything to play on the Super Nintendo. Barely. Except for like Resident Evil 2, which somehow magically appeared on the damn thing. That, and also there's barely any RPGs on the N64. However, there's two varieties of games that I feel like are overrepresented on the N64. It's 3D platformers and racing games. That's it. Maybe like a handful of first-person shooters. You know, Perfect Dark, GoldenEye, friggin', Doom 64, and Quake. Good Lord, Quake. So, yeah, if you like 3D platformers, first-person shooters, and racing games, then the N64 is just for you. Anyway, let's head into some of the handheld systems released during that time. And we have the Neo Geo Pocket, or Pocket Color, or whatever. I like that system because it has a really clicky analog stick. It was more powerful than the Game Boy. It had color graphics, and it had a lot of cool games. But because SNK pretty much shit the bed, the console didn't really realize its full potential. And we have the Wonder Swan, which I'm going to put in D tier because if you're the console known for two things, and that's being made by Gunpei Yokoi and Final Fantasy remakes, then you've got nothing going on as a handheld. Even though that's literally the latter second reason is pretty much the whole reason behind the PSP, but I mean, why and bother? And now we head into the 6th generation. Dreamcast, I'm just going to put an A tier because it has a lot of good games, a lot of RPGs, a lot of, fantastic arcade games, but I feel like it was a victim of Sega's own sort of almost Benito Mussolini-esque ham-fistedness and just poor timing. Like, I feel like the Dreamcast, if Sega simply just kept going with it, and yeah, I know, Sega had financial troubles. If Sega put the effort in and didn't do silly shit like spend several $1 million on Shenmue, then maybe the Dreamcast would have succeeded. Maybe. And then we go to the PS2, which I am going to put in S tier because it's everything that the PS1 did, but better. But the only problem is that I feel like the PS1 is a lot more magical than the PS2. And the PS2, I deeply love because it was the console I grew up with. Even after I got a Wii and a Wii U, I was still playing the ever-loving shit out of a PS2. And the Gamecube. The Gamecube. Good old Gamecube. I want to put it in A because of its quality, but realistically I want to put it in B. So I'm going to put it in B tier. And that's because it's just a crummy console. Like, it was the second most powerful behind the Xbox, the original Xbox. It had a lot of good games, but I mean, if you try collecting for the GameCube now, you're going to have to sell a few organs. And that's not good. And then the Xbox. C tier because the Xbox might as well be called the Halo box, because that's all the original Xbox was ever good for, Halo. You can fight me on that. And we got the handhelds of that generation. The Nokia N-Gage, hard F tier. The PSP. It's like the Wonder Swan, but better because it's made by Sony. And my brother owns one, so I'm going to put it in B tier. The Game Boy Advance. It has the best first generation Pokemon remakes. It has a lot of good games. So I'm going to put an A. Which brings us to the 7th generation of consoles. So, go with the Xbox 360. The Xbox 360, I never grew up with. So, and the thing loves to break down and overheat, so I'm going to put it in Eeny, Miny, Mo, catch the tiger by the toe. If he hollers, you are it. Okay, fine, C tier. The Wii, S tier. Sure, it has a lot of shovelware, but the Everybody Votes channel and, the Check Me Out channels were friggin' amazing, so fight me. The PS3, what happens when you make a console that is so overpowered that nobody knows how to program games for, and with an unreliability rate that if it weren't for the Xbox 360 would have been a horror show? I'm going to put it in D tier because the only thing saving it from it is backwards compatibility with the PS1 and PS2 games, provided you have the right model, which further cements the fact that it's going to be in D tier. Which brings us to the 8th generation of consoles. Wii U. Not as memorable as the Wii. Didn't have as many good games. C tier. Oh yeah, I forgot the handhelds. The DS, S tier. The 3DS, putting it on S tier. And the Vita. If you like anime, then it's S tier. If you don't, that's F tier, unless somebody proves to me that there's a Toho game on it. Oh yeah, I forgot the Ouya. Oh, no wonder I forgot it. It's because it's the Ouya. F. It's proof that you shouldn't try to make a competitive micro console on Kickstarter. You just don't. So anyway, the PS4. I am going to put it in B tier because it has a lot of good games, but I don't own one, nor do I have the intent to own one. Unless, I am gifted one, and I am open to donations. So there. The Xbox One. I'm sorry, Halo fans, but I'm going to put an F tier because I have still not forgiven Microsoft for the bullshit they pulled at E3 in 2013, 2014, when they basically announced it as a DRM machine that also functions as a DVR. I still will not forgive the Xbox One for that. Will never forgive it because I shall never forget. The Xbox One has no exclusives. All of its games could be found either on PC or on the PS4. So there. And now the Nintendo Switch. The Nintendo Switch I am going to put in S tier because it is, frankly, the best console ever. It just is. Because it's versatile. It can serve a great variety of different lifestyles. If you have an active lifestyle and you want something powerful that isn't the Vita, then yes, get a Switch. Do you like good first-party games? And the Nintendo Switch is there. Hell, the Nintendo Switch is probably going to beat the shit out of the PS5 and the Xbox Series X because, one, the PS5 is going to come out in such limited quantities, and, because of the stupid coronavirus recession, nobody's going to afford a PS5. The Xbox Series X, even with the digital-only version being $300, it's not going to have exclusives for 2 years. So why would you get the $300 refrigerator that doesn't have any exclusive of its own, therefore no reason to own one, when you can get a 3-year-old console at the same price with an established library of first-party exclusives? Then yeah, it makes more economical and a lot more entertaining decision to get a Switch over an Xbox Series X. The PS5, even if the disc version is the same price as the Xbox Series X is disc drive version, I mean, who wants to pay $70 for a new game? Not me. I'd rather spend $60 on a game that is barely worth $40 because, Nintendo. Oh yeah, so this website that does the tier list, tiermaker.com, they have the Super Famicom and the Famicom, which I am going to not include because they're exactly the same thing. The only reason I'd put the Famicom there is because Samurai Pizza Cat's got a game on there. And the Super Nintendo's got JRPGs that are probably fun to play, but I can't read Japanese, nor do I have the initiative to learn Japanese. Anyway, that concludes this tier list video. Please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.